Hi everybody, welcome back to my shop. Welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker. I'm your host, Shannon Rogers. Today's episode is actually inspired by a Twitter friend, David Young, who brought up the, shall we say, the tired argument of whether or not I use a joiner plane fence to square an edge. Now, Matt Vanderlist and I have bantered back and forth on this for some time, and it's become kind of a joke now. But I responded to David by saying, no, I don't actually own a joiner fence. I have kind of a built-in square these days. And really, with enough practice, you really get a feel for a square edge on a board when you're planing. Now, traditionally, the joiner plane can be used any number of ways. You can put a slight camber on your blade, and that's great when you're working, flattening, say, the face of a board, getting it nice and flat and true. Even works really well on the edge of a board like this, because the camber will present a different depth of iron along the edge of the board. So the center of the iron is going to be my deepest projection, or my thickest shaving. As I move to the edge, my shaving is going to get thinner. So positioning the plane laterally along the board will allow you to remove high spots in the angle. So if my edge were out of square, came up this direction so that the high edge was the edge here closest to the camera, I could position the center of this plane over that high edge, and I could make a pass. Now, I've taken a deeper, more wood off this edge, this high edge, than I have on the edge nearest to me, and that will level things out. That's probably the most traditional method of doing this. However, I often use an uncambered iron in my joiner plane for, and get this is crazy, for jointing. Anytime I want to create a long grain glue joint, say I wanted to take this board and glue it to another board to make a wider panel. You could certainly use the cambered iron, but you're not ending up with a flat edge. It may be square, but you're still going to have a bit of a dip to it, and it's not going to present the best glue joint for you. So I like to use my flat iron for these glue joints, for the best wood-to-wood long grain glue joint. Now what I found is once I've got the iron in my joiner and I'm working with it, and if I switch over to another activity, I get a little lazy. And laziness oftentimes inspires new techniques. Now this is probably not a new technique, but it's new to me. And what I've found is if I've got an edge that's ridiculously out of square, I could probably grab my foreplane that has a cambered iron to it and go to work to use that same technique. Now the foreplane has a much more radically cambered iron, so it will remove more wood from that high side. And a lot of times when I grab the foreplane, I overshoot. So I start with this edge closest to the camera high, I take a pass with the foreplane, and next thing I know, that edge is way low because my foreplane just takes a deeper cut. So I could then switch the straight iron out of my joiner plane back to my slightly cambered iron and take care of it very easily. But that's extra work. And if I'm just wanting to flatten this edge for a joint, I don't want to go through that extra work. So I came up with a technique that involves using my block plane to address this. Now keep in mind, the simplest way to edge joint two boards using a flat iron is to do the match planing technique, where you fold the boards together like a book and plane them in unison so that you get complementary angles. That's the simplest way. We'll assume that that's not an option in this case, and we want to straighten out this edge just using the straight iron. So rather than trying to angle your plane and kind of balance it so it removes one higher side or something like that, go to a smaller, more agile block plane. And again, assuming that this corner closest to the camera is high, I'll simply drop my block plane on the board so that this corner of the blade is actually in the center of the board. And I'll remove a shaving. Now all I'm doing is removing a shaving from the center of the board towards the high side. I find that the way my block plane is set right now, it's kind of taking a light cut, maybe 2 to 3 passes and I'll come back and I'll check with my square. This edge is still a little bit high, so I'll take 2 more passes and come back and check again. And now, my edge, I don't have any light showing under the square. Now, what I've done is I've dropped that high edge down. Now, I have created a faceted surface. Because the block plane was only removing wood from the center over, I now have 2 facets. The original facet, when I first got the edge out of square, and then the one I just created with the block plane. But now that the edge is square, and this edge and this edge closest to me are in the same plane with one another, I can come in here with the joiner plane and pressing firmly down so that the blade, or excuse me, the sole of the plane is actually hitting both corners. And make a pass from end to end. What you're doing is looking at the shaving that comes out. You're looking for a full width shaving, which I just got there. Now I've got a complete shaving from end to end, usually 1 pass with a joiner plane, unless your joiner plane is set really, really fine. That's all it takes. Now when I come back and I look, I've got a perfectly square edge with no light coming through underneath the square. Didn't have to switch out a blade, stayed with a straight iron, and frankly, I find that I keep the straight iron in my joiner plane a lot more, because I will usually, if I flatten a board, even if I'm flattening the face, I usually come back over it with a smoother plane. And if I get tiny plane tracks from a straight iron, I can remove those with a smoothing plane. Now, to be clear, my joiner plane, this is a straight iron, I have ever so slightly clipped the corners. Basically, I imagine putting a tiny little chamfer on the corners. The iron is not curved or cambered, it just kind of comes and nips off the end so that I'm not getting the corners digging in. But that's minuscule. It's done with a couple of passes with a file. So I don't get radical plane tracks on this like I would if I left those corners perfectly square. But I just find that more and more I'm keeping the straight iron in here because it's great for jointing. Go figure. This is a quick, easy, takes really no practice at all. Because of the fact that the block plane is so small, you can very accurately position it. You've got full control over the entire pass, and you can, minutely adjust it as it goes across the board. If you've got somehow a twisted edge, or you've got a high edge, the high edge is closest to the camera down here, and it's closest to me on this end, you can actually go diagonally across the board, and you can minutely position or precisely position that plane to remove only the wood you want to remove, and it will allow you to straighten out the edge of the board. It involves certainly having a block plane around. I like having the block plane set nice and fine, but that's it, really. You've got a perfectly squared edge. You didn't have to worry about going to the trouble of cambering any irons. You didn't really have to worry about, positioning this big heavy plane back and forth and still getting a good shaving. Block plane to the rescue, solves the problem. So I hope that helps for you guys that are struggling getting an edge square to the board. This technique works on end grain, it works on face grain, whatever you need. I find it to be really helpful, quick, and somewhat of a cheat to straighten out those edges. Enjoy it and get into the shops and try it out. Let me know what you think. Let me know if this is just I've been doing this for years. This is just something I discovered recently, and I find that it works really well when I'm feeling particularly lazy and don't want to go grab another plane.